Okay, I'm going to be shooting from the hip in this video, and I'm staying awake, and I'm probably a little bit too fatigued from having just eaten a lot of carbohydrate-rich foods, so my apologies if I don't articulate myself properly, but this message is intended for people who kind of slipped through the cracks of society as they were growing up, okay? A fundamental part of keeping your head on straight if you're going through rough times. You know, if you're in and out of homeless shelters, psych wards, different kinds of transitional housing, couch surfing, and so on and so forth, is learning to quietly confront and reconfront the extent to which people have failed you, okay? Sometimes you're well behaved and you're law abiding and you're not hurting anyone and you're not plotting to hurt anyone, but thanks to quirks that you're born with, let's say you have trouble focusing due to inattentiveness or something, you can obviously end up in a very sorry place in life through no fault of your own, okay? So there seems to be in some parts of the internet a renewal of this discourse that suggests that if someone is poor persistently, then it's mainly due to character flaws. But once you understand how different kinds of experiences interact with innate traits and how trauma works across generations, not on a genetic level, but simply in terms of how people mess each other up across time, you get to confront that most of us are not really proactively self-shaping entities. We're kind of conglomerations of forces over which we have little or no control, especially when we're younger. So I guess all of this is to try to bring a certain point home, which is that if you feel like you are broken or your life is not going well, you do not need to feel saddled with this burden of thinking of yourself as someone who is defective and not fit for society or like an alien. You know, it is okay for you to sit down and realize, you know, my parents failed me, my extended family failed me, my sports coaches failed me, my religious leaders failed me, all kinds of people failed me, not necessarily due to their bad intentions, but because they were maybe in a state of ignorance regarding what your core flaws were. In my personal case in real life, I'm naturally like obsessed with daydreaming and very aloof and inattentive. Okay, so life is hard enough as it is, obviously, and when you're dealing with hard experiences, it's incredibly hard. And it breaks you, and sometimes you have, you know, nights where you can't even get out of bed, or you can't even walk your way into a place of employment because there's too much tightness and tension in your nervous system, and you just read as a kind of rabid animal to other people or something, okay? So in those times in which you're alone and you don't have support and you do have addictions, and you're trying to have good intentions and you're trying to believe in God and you're trying to be on good terms with people, but you're too activated, you have too much adrenaline, you have too much stress, you have too little positive emotions and too little positive reinforcement from other people. It's important to just keep in mind that, like, you know, people have failed you and it's not your fault. And this sounds so utterly basic and so utterly pathetically simple and straightforward. But I don't know. I'm somebody who lived years of my life in constant fear of homelessness, particularly before I started taking supplements and caffeinated drinks to help me think clearly and work regularly. And that left a sort of permanent stain upon my consciousness, whereby I started to realize, like, we have an enormous number, as in millions of people in this country who are suffering in silence because they're trained by certain kinds of implicit and explicit cultural insignia to see themselves as proactively self-sabotaging, when in reality what's happening is that people are acting out scripts that they inherited through no fault of their own. Okay, so you are not to blame if you are a failure or a loser or a reject or an outcast or even a lolcow in some situations, okay? How would I summarize the point of this video? Learn to admit when people have failed you. And when you really confront that that's happened, then you can kind of be relieved of this oppressive, mounting, horrible, guilt-instilling sense of like weight on your shoulders that says you didn't respond properly to other people's opportunities. Because sometimes it's not common to say, it's not polite to say this in common society, but sometimes you end up as either a born loser or an accidental failure. You know, maybe you fall down the stairs one day and you get a brain injury and nobody really diagnoses you with anything, but now you can't remember anything, you know. So learn to admit when people have failed you. And after you do that, you don't have to get angry at those people because they're probably just functioning in a state of ignorance. But what you can do is not feel obligated to live your life in a sort of defensive stance for the rest of your days, okay? At a certain point, you can put down the burden of like a self-protective stance. It's easier said than done, I know, but I don't know, especially when I'm alone by myself, I relax very deeply, and being a failure in the eyes of society doesn't mean you can't still end up as like a moral saint of sorts. So I'll offer sort of quantifiable insights about that particular claim later, maybe in a writing or maybe in a video. But I don't know, sometimes everybody abandons you, and in a silent, dark room you discover that you have the capacity to end up becoming a saintly person rather than to off yourself. So I'll try to talk about that in kind of a warm-hearted and upbeat tone later on. All right, thank you for watching and have a good day. When you're all alone in a dark room and you don't know what your future is going to be like, you access the option to shape yourself and to shape your future according to values that you don't have to disclose to anybody else who wasn't there for you in your darkest moments. So, whether the future in general is ours to create, we can certainly shape ourselves into something that'll smile whenever we look at ourselves in the bathroom mirror.